Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt tales of kindness, resilience, and unexpected connections. In today's story, a simple act of generosity transforms the lives of a struggling family and a man searching for purpose. What begins as a small gesture on a flight unravels into a journey filled with challenges, hope, and profound life lessons. Get ready to be inspired by a story that shows how compassion can ripple through lives in unimaginable ways. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories to start this journey with us today. Michael adjusted the strap of his leather backpack as he stepped into the first-class cabin of a New York-bound flight. He had worked tirelessly to reach this point in his career, securing a promotion as a data analyst for one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Yet, as he walked down the aisle, his confidence wavered. He wasn't oblivious to the glances, some curious, others judgmental. First class wasn't a space he was used to occupying, and judging by the stares, neither were many people used to seeing someone like him there. He lowered himself into the plush seat by the window, consciously keeping his movements deliberate. The cabin hummed with quiet luxury, the clinking of champagne glasses, the rustle of newspapers, and the occasional laughter from passengers dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses. Michael wasn't here for indulgence. He needed to arrive in New York well-rested for a critical pitch that could define the next phase of his career. He had spent countless nights preparing, and while his nerves whispered doubts, he was determined to prove his worth. As the flight crew moved through the cabin, offering drinks and warm towels, Michael retrieved his favorite book from his bag, a novel he'd been rereading for comfort. He was about to lose himself in its pages when a soft murmur pulled his attention. Looking up, he noticed a woman standing a few rows ahead in the aisle, her posture unsteady. Her hand gripped the overhead compartment for balance, the other resting on her visibly pregnant belly. Beside her stood a man, presumably her husband, looking equally concerned. Michael's gaze lingered on the couple. The woman's face was pale, her expression a mix of exhaustion and discomfort. The man whispered something to her, glancing anxiously at the rows of first-class passengers. Michael followed his gaze, noting how the others avoided eye contact. No one moved, their postures stiff as though offering their seats was out of the question. Michael shifted in his seat. He thought of his mother, a woman of quiet resilience who had instilled in him the importance of kindness and empathy. She often said, "Sometimes, the best thing you can give isn't money or advice, it's a little space to breathe." That thought echoed in his mind as he glanced at the empty seat beside him. Before he could second-guess himself, Michael stood, walking down the aisle until he reached the couple. He said softly, his voice cutting through the awkward silence. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes tired but kind. "Take my seat. It's more comfortable here." The words hung in the air for a moment. Her husband, a man named Ryan, blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Michael offered a reassuring smile. "Positive. You'll be more comfortable up here." The woman hesitated, her hand instinctively resting on her belly as if weighing the decision. I don't want to trouble you," she murmured. "It's no trouble." Michael insisted gently, stepping aside to make room. "Please." Gratitude lit up her face as she whispered, "Thank you," and carefully eased into the seat. Ryan shook Michael's hand firmly, his words barely above a whisper. "I can't thank you enough. You have no idea how much this means to us." Michael nodded, brushing off the thanks as he made his way to the economy cabin. It wasn't until he found his new seat, cramped between two strangers, that he allowed himself to reflect on what he'd just done. He adjusted his long legs to fit the narrow space, feeling the discomfort settle in. Still, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. In his heart, he knew it had been the right thing to do. As the plane took off, Michael stared out the window, watching the world grow smaller beneath him. He thought of the woman, Emily, he later learned, and her husband. The image of their relief stayed with him, He knew he wouldn't hear from them again. He hadn't done it for recognition or reward. Yet, as the flight progressed, he couldn't help but wonder how they were doing. Emily seemed fragile but determined, and her husband's protectiveness reminded Michael of his own family's strength during hard times. By the time the plane landed in New York, Michael was physically drained but mentally at ease. He waited for the first-class passengers to disembark, catching a brief glimpse of Emily and Ryan. She turned and smiled faintly at him, mouthing, "Thank you one last time." Michael nodded, grabbing his bag and stepping into the bustling airport, ready to face the challenges that awaited him. What he didn't know was that this small act of kindness would ripple far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin, weaving his fate with theirs in ways none of them could have predicted. As he navigated the crowded terminal, his thoughts were already turning to the pitch he had to deliver later that day. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Michael carried the quiet hope that his gesture had made the journey just a little easier for Emily and her unborn child. This was only the beginning. Michael's morning began with a strong cup of coffee, the bustling sounds of New York City outside his hotel window. The day ahead was filled with the kind of high-pressure meetings that demanded his full attention. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the couple from the flight. He didn't expect to see them again, nor did he think much would come of his small gesture. Yet something about their earnest gratitude lingered in his mind. As he walked into a cafe near the office where his meeting was scheduled, Michael queued up for his second coffee of the day. The scent of freshly brewed espresso filled the air, mingling with the hum of quiet chatter. He shuffled forward in line, distractedly scrolling through his phone, until a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Hey," someone called hesitantly. Michael turned, spotting Ryan standing a few feet away, holding 2 steaming cups in a cardboard tray. His nervous grin mirrored the kind of gratitude that couldn't be put into words. "I wasn't sure I'd run into you again, but I wanted to thank you properly." Michael raised a hand, dismissing the thanks. "Really? It's not necessary. I was happy to help." "No, seriously," Ryan insisted, setting the cups down on a nearby table to shake Michael's hand. "You didn't just help. You made what could have been a nightmare bearable." "Emily," his voice caught for a moment, emotion flickering in his eyes. "She's been through a lot lately, and that seat made all the difference." Ryan explained that Emily had been dealing with complications in her pregnancy. The stress of her father's recent passing, combined with managing his estate, had taken a toll. "We're here to handle the paperwork," Ryan said, gesturing vaguely. "It's been overwhelming. She wanted to be here for her family before the baby comes. But honestly, I wasn't sure if she could handle the trip." Michael nodded, unsure how to respond. He could see the weight Ryan carried, not just for Emily but for the unborn child and the uncertain road ahead. "How's she doing now?" Michael asked. "Better. Thanks to you." Ryan smiled, his gratitude palpable. "She's resting at the hotel. I offered to pick up breakfast, which is why I'm here." Michael smiled back, appreciating the man's sincerity. "That's good to hear. Really. I'm glad she's okay." Ryan hesitated, glancing at Michael as if gauging something unspoken. "Listen," he began. "Emily and I were talking, and we'd like to invite you to dinner tonight. It's the least we can do to show our appreciation." Michael was taken aback. His usual instinct would have been to politely decline. He didn't know these people, and he had a full day ahead. But something in Ryan's voice, an almost desperate need for connection, made him pause. "Sure," Michael found himself saying. "I'd like that." Ryan beamed. "Great. I'll text you the details." After exchanging numbers, Ryan thanked him again and left with the coffee tray. Michael watched him disappear into the morning crowd, feeling an unexpected sense of purpose. He hadn't set out to form any connections, but it seemed fate had other plans. That evening, Michael arrived at a modest restaurant tucked into a quieter part of the city. The soft glow of warm lighting spilled onto the sidewalk as he stepped inside. Ryan waved him over to a table in the corner, where Emily sat, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. She looked up as Michael approached, her face lighting up with a smile. "Michael," she said warmly, "it's so good to see you again. Thank you for coming." They exchanged pleasantries, and soon the conversation flowed easily. Emily expressed her gratitude firsthand, her words carrying the sincerity of someone who had been at her breaking point. "You didn't have to give up your seat," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But you did. And it meant everything." Michael shrugged, a bit embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what felt right." As they shared dinner, Ryan and Emily spoke more about their situation. The estate left by Emily's father was a maze of paperwork, incomplete records, and financial complexities. Emily admitted she felt lost trying to make sense of it all, especially with her pregnancy and recent health scares. Ryan leaned forward, his tone hopeful. "We were wondering, Michael, you work with data, right? Would you be willing to look at some of the documents, just to see if anything stands out?" Michael hesitated. He had a full plate with his job, and this wasn't exactly his area of expertise. But looking at Emily's weary face, he felt a tug of responsibility. "I can take a look," he said finally. "No promises, though." Emily exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you. That's all we're asking." As the evening wound down, Michael left the restaurant with a folder of documents and a strange sense of purpose. He had no idea what he was stepping into, but something told him this was only the beginning. The documents sat on the desk in Michael's hotel room, their weight seeming disproportionate to their actual heft. The folder was filled with ledger sheets, bank statements, and what appeared to be incomplete records. Michael had spread them out like puzzle pieces, his analytical mind already piecing together patterns. He had promised Emily and Ryan he would take a look. And though this wasn't his usual type of work, his curiosity had been piqued. As he sifted through the pages, he noticed something peculiar. Several transactions stood out, large sums of money routed through multiple accounts, each one labeled vaguely with terms like shipping fees and operational costs. On closer inspection, the amounts didn't align with the volume of business described in the other records. One company name kept recurring, Walker Logistics, tied to an address in Pennsylvania. Michael frowned, his instincts telling him this wasn't a simple case of mismanagement. He grabbed his laptop, searching for information about Walker Logistics. The address led to a warehouse in a small industrial district. The more he read, the more questions surfaced. Why was so much money funneled through this company? And why were there so few details about its operations? He called Ryan the next morning, his voice careful but direct. "There's something off about these records," Michael began. "A lot of money is tied to a company called Walker Logistics. Do you recognize the name?" There was a pause before Ryan answered. "I think my father-in-law mentioned it once. Something about a business associate, Ethan Walker. They worked together years ago. But I don't know much beyond that." Michael leaned back in his chair, considering this new information. "Do you think Emily would know more?" "Maybe," Ryan said hesitantly, "but I don't want to stress her out right now. Her blood pressure's been stable since the flight, and I want to keep it that way." Michael respected the concern. "I'll dig a little deeper on my end. We don't have enough to act yet. But if there's anything suspicious, it's tied to this Walker Logistics." The next few days were a whirlwind of research and analysis. Michael spent his evenings poring over the documents and his days fielding calls for work. Balancing both responsibilities felt like walking a tightrope. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was onto something significant. His first clue came from a local business forum where Walker Logistics had been flagged in a discussion about unusual shipping practices. It was Friday evening when Ryan called again. "Emily mentioned something tonight. She said her father used to trust Ethan Walker, but they had a falling out a few years back. She didn't go into details." Michael nodded. Even though Ryan couldn't see him, That tracks. I've found some chatter online suggesting Walker's business isn't entirely above board. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise a red flag. Ryan sighed on the other end of the line. What do we do now? Michael hesitated. He knew the next step would require more than just online research. I think we need to visit the warehouse. See if there's anything there that might give us answers. The suggestion hung in the air for a moment before Ryan responded. All right. Let's do it. That weekend, Michael drove to Pennsylvania with Ryan. The warehouse was located in a quiet part of town. Its exterior unremarkable, just corrugated metal walls and a gated perimeter. They parked a short distance away. Approaching cautiously, the gate was locked, and there was no sign of activity. But a large sign reading Walker Logistics loomed over the entrance. Ryan rattled the gate, glancing around nervously. Do you think anyone's here? As if on cue, a man stepped out of a nearby side door. He was in his 50s, wearing a heavy jacket and a skeptical expression. What do you want? He called out. Ryan stepped forward, explaining that they were trying to tie up loose ends regarding Emily's father's estate. We found some financial records linked to this place and thought someone here might be able to help. The man didn't soften. You'll have to talk to Ethan Walker himself. I'm just the foreman. He's out of town. Can we leave a message? Michael asked, trying to appear non-threatening. The foreman's eyes narrowed, lingering on Michael. Leave your number. I'll pass it along. But don't expect much. Walker doesn't like people poking around. Michael handed over a business card, his gut telling him the man knew more than he let on. As they walked back to the car, Ryan muttered, "That didn't tell us much. It told us enough." Michael said grimly, "They're hiding something." The drive back was quiet. Both men lost in their thoughts. Michael's mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. What started as an act of kindness on a flight was now pulling him deeper into a web of secrets. He couldn't turn back now, not when Emily and Ryan needed answers. And not when the truth was so tantalizingly close. This was far from over. The next morning, Michael woke to a flood of messages from Ryan. Most were updates about Emily. She was doing well, resting, and focusing on staying healthy for the baby. But one message stood out. We found something strange in her father's files. You need to see this. Michael arrived at Ryan and Emily's hotel later that afternoon, a cup of coffee in hand and his mind already racing with possibilities. Ryan greeted him at the door, his expression a mix of urgency and apprehension. We were going through an old lockbox Emily's dad kept. Found these, he said, holding up a stack of folded papers. Letters. Threatening ones. Michael took the papers, his eyes scanning the bold, block-typed text. The messages were ominous yet vague. Stop asking questions. You don't want this to escalate. The signature was even more unsettling, a single initial. W. These are recent. Michael murmured, noting the postmarks. Ethan Walker. Ryan nodded grimly. That's my guess. There's no hard proof. But the timing matches everything we've seen so far. Emily appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. Michael, she said softly, do you think these threats have anything to do with my dad's death? Michael hesitated. He wanted to reassure her, but the truth felt more pressing. I don't know yet, but it's possible. He might have known something Walker didn't want anyone else to find out. Emily pressed a hand to her belly, her gaze distant. My dad wasn't perfect, but he wouldn't have knowingly gotten involved in anything illegal. I need to understand what happened. Her quiet resolve struck Michael. He nodded. We'll get to the bottom of it. I promise. Back at his hotel, Michael dove deeper into his research. The financial records pointed to a pattern, large sums of money funneled through dummy accounts, labeled with cryptic references like consulting fees and storage costs. Combined with the threatening letters, the pieces painted a picture of coercion. He suspected Walker had pressured Emily's father into enabling questionable shipments through his company, possibly smuggling or fraud. But suspicion wasn't enough. He needed concrete evidence. The next day, Ryan called with another update. Emily's lawyer, Leonard, suggested bringing in a private investigator. He thinks we need someone who can dig into Walker's background without raising alarms. Michael agreed. It's a good idea. I'll coordinate with Leonard and make sure we're all on the same page. Leonard, a composed man in his 50s, met with Michael and Ryan at his office that afternoon. He reviewed the documents and listened intently as they laid out their findings. You've done a lot of legwork already, Leonard said, nodding at Michael. This gives us a starting point. I'll contact an investigator I trust. In the meantime, keep digging but be careful. Walker isn't the type to take lightly. A week passed in a blur of cautious progress. The investigator uncovered links between Walker and a network of shell companies, all tied to questionable international shipments. Meanwhile, Michael combed through more of the financial records, uncovering additional anomalies that suggested embezzlement. But the most startling discovery came during a quiet evening when Ryan called with urgency in his voice. Someone left a note at our door, he said. It's another threat. Michael's chest tightened. What does it say? Ryan read it aloud. Last warning. Stay out of this. Michael clenched his jaw. We need to involve the police. Ryan sighed. Emily's already on edge. I don't want to scare her more. But you're right. I'll call Leonard and see what he thinks. By the next morning, the police were discreetly looped in. Their advice clear: gather more evidence and avoid provoking Walker. The tension weighed heavily on all of them. But Emily remained a steady presence, focused on preparing for the baby despite the storm brewing around her. Michael worked late into the night, analyzing every clue they'd gathered. As he stared at the spreadsheets and threatening notes spread across his desk, he realized something crucial. The threads they were pulling didn't just lead to Walker. They unraveled an entire operation. And Emily's father might have been a victim trapped at its center. He leaned back, exhaustion settling over him. But determination burned brighter. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about giving Emily and Ryan peace and ensuring their family could move forward without fear. The stakes were higher than ever. But Michael was ready to see it through, no matter where the trail led. The tension was palpable as Michael, Ryan, and Leonard convened in the lawyer's office the next day. The private investigator had uncovered enough to suggest they were closing in on Ethan Walker. He's running a smuggling ring, Leonard said gravely, pointing to a file of evidence. Precious stones, counterfeit goods, possibly more. Your father-in-law, Emily, may have unwittingly facilitated this. Ryan clenched his fists, his frustration barely contained. He would never have knowingly done that. Leonard raised a calming hand. From what we've seen, I believe that. But Walker had leverage. Your father-in-law may have been coerced or deceived. Michael flipped through the investigator's file, noting photographs of shipping containers marked with falsified invoices. This is enough to involve the authorities, he said. Have we shared this with the detective? Leonard nodded. Yes. But they need more for an airtight case. Walker's operation spans multiple jurisdictions. The police want to make this count. As they discussed next steps, Ryan's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. It's another warning, he said, showing them the screen. The text was short but chilling. This is your last chance. Drop it. Michael's stomach churned. They're watching us. Leonard straightened in his chair. We need to keep moving. But I urge caution. Walker's desperation makes him dangerous. Later that evening, Michael met Ryan at their hotel. Emily was in the next room, resting after another doctor's appointment. She's doing okay, Ryan said, his voice quieter than usual. But I can't shake the feeling that we're putting her at risk. Michael nodded. I get it. But the closer we get to the truth, the safer she'll be. This isn't just about exposing Walker, it's about protecting your family. The next morning, the private investigator called with a breakthrough. We've identified a key location, he said. A warehouse near the docks that seems central to Walker's operation. It's worth checking out. Michael and Ryan agreed to visit the site, careful not to attract attention. When they arrived, the warehouse loomed large against the grey sky, its weathered exterior giving little away. They parked a distance away and observed, noting workers loading crates onto trucks. The investigator, watching with them, pointed to a man issuing orders near the entrance. That's Walker, he said. He doesn't usually show up himself. So this is significant. Michael snapped photos discreetly, documenting everything. The air felt heavy, the weight of their actions sinking in. If we can link this to the shipments in Emily's father's records, we'll have what we need, Michael said. Ryan frowned, his jaw tight. I don't like leaving Emily alone right now. She's safe, the investigator assured him. The police are keeping an eye on things. Still, Ryan's unease was contagious. They decided to leave quickly, not wanting to push their luck. As they drove away, Michael's phone buzzed, a message from Leonard. The detective had requested a meeting to discuss the latest findings. That evening, Michael and Ryan sat across from the detective in his office, presenting the photos and documents. This aligns with what we've been tracking, the detective said, flipping through the files. It's enough to obtain a warrant. Relief washed over Michael. Finally, they were making tangible progress. But the detective's expression remained cautious. Be prepared. This kind of case doesn't resolve overnight. And there's a chance Walker will retaliate before we bring him in. The warning lingered as Michael returned to his hotel that night. Sleep was elusive, his mind replaying the day's events. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into a minefield. Yet, for Emily and Ryan's sake, he knew there was no turning back. The next morning brought a mix of hope and dread. The police executed a raid on Walker's warehouse, uncovering evidence of smuggling operations and implicating him in a string of financial crimes. Walker and 2 associates were arrested, their empire crumbling under the weight of the investigation. When Michael got the news, he immediately called Ryan. It's over, he said, the words heavy with both relief and exhaustion. Walker's been arrested. Ryan's response was immediate. Thank God. I'll tell Emily. For the first time in weeks, the dark cloud over their lives began to lift. But as Michael hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that, even with Walker behind bars, the journey had changed them all in ways they were just beginning to understand. The news of Walker's arrest brought a palpable sense of relief to Emily and Ryan. For the first time in weeks, their home felt lighter, free from the oppressive shadow of looming threats. Michael met them at their apartment the following morning, and Emily greeted him with a weary but genuine smile. I can't thank you enough, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You've done more for us than I ever thought anyone would. Michael shook his head. I just followed the trail. You two stayed strong through all of it. That's what matters. As they sat around the dining table, Michael detailed what the police had uncovered at the warehouse: falsified invoices, smuggled goods, and records linking Walker to a network of illicit activities. It was enough to ensure he would face justice. Emily held her cup of tea tightly, her knuckles white. I still can't believe my dad's name got caught up in all of this. He wasn't perfect. But he wasn't a criminal. He was deceived. Michael said gently. Walker took advantage of his trust. The important thing is that his legacy isn't tied to Walker's crimes anymore. The words seemed to comfort Emily, and for the first time, her shoulders relaxed. She placed a hand on her rounded belly. Her protective instincts now focused on the life she was bringing into the world. At least our child won't grow up with this hanging over our family. Ryan placed a hand over hers, their silent connection speaking volumes. Michael watched them, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude for having played a part in their journey. The following weeks were a flurry of rebuilding and reflection. The financial mess left behind by Walker was gradually untangled. Thanks to the help of their lawyer, Leonard, and the police, Emily focused on preparing for the baby, her energy now directed toward the joy of impending parenthood. Michael, meanwhile, returned to his work, his life seemingly resuming its usual rhythm. Yet, something inside him had shifted. One evening, as Michael sat in his apartment reviewing a new project proposal, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. "Emily's in labor. We're heading to the hospital now." Michael didn't hesitate. Grabbing his keys, he drove to the hospital, a nervous energy coursing through him. When he arrived, Ryan was pacing the waiting room, his expression a mix of excitement and fear. "How's she doing?" Michael asked. "They just took her in," Ryan said, running a hand through his hair. "She's amazing. But I can't help feeling useless right now." Michael placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're here. And that's what counts. She knows you're by her side." Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Until finally, a nurse emerged with a wide smile. "You can see her now. Mother and baby are both healthy." Ryan exhaled a shaky breath, his relief evident. He hurried into the room, and Michael followed at a respectful distance. Inside, Emily lay in bed, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle, the baby's delicate features just visible beneath a soft pink blanket. Michael stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the scene. Ryan leaned over Emily, his voice low as he whispered to their daughter. Emily looked up, catching Michael's eye, and motioned for him to come closer. "She's beautiful," Michael said softly, his heart swelling as he gazed at the newborn. Emily smiled. "Her name is Grace. We thought it was fitting." The three of them shared a quiet moment, the weight of the past weeks dissolving into the warmth of new life. For Michael, it was a profound reminder of why he had chosen to stay and help. In this room, surrounded by love and resilience, he saw the true impact of kindness. As he left the hospital later that night, the crisp air filled his lungs, and he felt lighter than he had in months. This chapter of their journey was over, but its lessons would stay with him forever, that even the smallest gestures could ripple into extraordinary changes, and that compassion often carries rewards far greater than imagined. And for Michael, those rewards were worth every step of the way. In the end, Michael's simple act of kindness not only changed his life but also gave Emily and Ryan the strength to rebuild theirs. The struggles they faced brought them closer, and their resilience inspired everyone around them. Their daughter, Grace, became a symbol of hope and a fresh start for their family. Michael left knowing he had made a difference, and the bond they shared would last a lifetime. This story reminds us that even the smallest gestures can create ripples of change. A selfless act, a helping hand, or just being there for someone in need can transform lives in ways we never imagine. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story of courage, love, and kindness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on more inspiring tales that touch the heart and soul. See you in the next story.